work you've probably seen, heard, or read without realizing. We're digging into how they got here, the twists, the detours, and what's driving them now.
Today, I'm in conversation with Stephen Dobbie.
Probably a football player, probably playing for Liverpool, because Ian Rush was the greatest player in the world at the time. But then my favour switched to Tottenham because one of my best friends at school supported Tottenham. So then I started supporting Tottenham. But if you will allow me, I'd love to jump forward 5 years to when I was about 10. I was a very avid drawer. Me and my sort of group of friends would avidly have drawing sessions where we would draw whatever, cars. My parents had a Sunday Times book of bird illustrations that I just loved reproducing these illustrations from this book. So sort of drawing things and sort of copying things but drawing as a group, drawing with other people was something that I really, really enjoyed. And it was a really lovely moment of connection with friends and brothers and sisters and that kind of thing. So drawing was a key thing in my life at that time. And to this day, I don't know where this came from, but I distinctly remember as a 10 or 11-year-old saying that I wanted to be a graphic designer when I was older. And I have no idea where that idea of a graphic designer came from, where I'd heard about it and if I even knew what it meant. But I knew that it was something that involved visual communication. Be that through drawing something or writing something down or painting something. So yeah, age 10, I kind of proclaimed that I wanted to be a graphic designer. And I mean, that kind of happened, sort of 10, 12 years later, that was what I found myself doing, as well as photography.
So how was that? But how were those sessions? Because obviously that must have meant that there was something in those drawing sessions that just brought something to your life that you were like, I want to have this forever.
I think sort of looking back on it, I think it was something that I enjoyed. And it was something that I wanted to do and I wanted to improve at. And I'm not sure whether I was cognizant of it at the time, but it was a means of expressing oneself, that your way of communicating with the world didn't necessarily have to be through language, like verbal language. It could be something through something visual. Something that kind of creates, I don't know, in very simplistic terms, creates a version of your view of the world. Something like that, which kind of, I guess, is sort of very forming those early steps in forming how you engage with the world, how you communicate with it. Sorry.
It's interesting because obviously I started taking pictures when I was 15 years old, and I fell in love with that medium. And then when I arrived to university and I decided to have to get a BFA, immediately they took the camera away from me. It's like, no, now you need to learn how to draw and you need to have your basics in art and all that kind of thing. And I remember being so frustrated trying to do life drawing because I just couldn't understand how to do it. And I always thought that it was like this. And eventually John, who bless his heart, allowed me to figure out what was my stroke. And I'll never forget the moment that I realized how I could draw and what my style of drawing was. The world just opened up and it was like, here's an entire new space for you to, create and have a vision. And it was so amazing.
Must have been incredibly liberating as well. And also to have the support of a teacher or a mentor that kind of that encourages and is supportive of your own way of communicating, your own style. And I remember having an art class once where we had a visiting lecturer come in. I think it was during my A-levels, and it was hilarious. We were in the school gym, and there was a lecturer, a visiting lecturer, but then we also had a life model. And this life model was just literally running naked around the school gymnasium and then pausing, and then we'd have 30 seconds to draw her. I mean, just a wonderful scene, a bunch of like 17-year-old boys chasing, because we were at an all boys school, chasing this excellent life model around the gym. And we had these huge bits of paper, like as big as bed sheets, and we'd charcoal, and we'd draw them. We'd draw whatever we could in that 30 seconds. And I remember one time she stopped, we had slightly longer. And we had, I think, 2 or 3 minutes. So we all sort of drew whatever, drew what we'd seen in front of us. And the lecturer would come round and she'd say, and when you think you've finished, just step away from your drawing. So sort of one by one, we'd all sort of step away, and she came over to mine and then just picked the charcoal up, walked all over the picture, and then just like drew all over it. Which was at the time it was shocking. It was hilarious as well, because it was just like, well, I've just drawn that, and then you've just drawn all over it. But it was a really early and significant moment of understanding process. That a lot of making and creating of things is having that ability to take a step back when you think you finished something, and be able to analyze it and kind of work out, whether something's finished or not. I think is a misnomer, because I think it's sort of often something is finished when you run out of time, or you or a deadline, be it exterior or self-imposed, kind of means that something has to come to a conclusion. And that point of finishing something is important, because it means that you can kind of pack that away. But the learning that you had whilst creating it is still with you. And it also was a lesson in sort of not being precious, and it's something that I've come to realize later in my life and my career, that if you've chosen a life of making things, creating things, then the last thing you make won't be the last thing you make. It won't necessarily be the best thing you make. It will just be something that you made. But if the intention is to continue to make things, then everything that went into that last thing you make, which you pat yourself on the back and you've gone, yep, not going to get any better than that. Lo and behold, in 5 years, you then go, not going to get any better than that. But in between that time, you've still made stuff, and it's the process of making, which for me, it has become so important. And I think thinking back, maybe that those drawing sessions with friends was an early exploration of that. If you're drawing things, if you're making things, and for me, it was drawing, and then it became photography. I picked up photography and the camera when I was 16, 17. Loved the immediacy of it. I loved the science of it as well. Loved the mysticalness, the almost supernaturalness of making a photograph using wet chemical technology. And for others, of course, it's writing. or it's physical movement, or it's whatever it is, whatever. Yeah, even riding your bike, being the best at skateboarding. It's all of these are processes that require practice and require your dedication to them. So, sort of doing them as much as you can.
I always speak about my work as flags, and leaving flags across the period of my life, and then being able to turn around to see those flags and see the moment in life in which I was and the things that I was doing and how that informed anything else that I've done. And so with the hope that those flags show a path of work, of things that I've done, but also that at some moment they've become something that someone else can look at and use as a reference for their own path. It doesn't mean they're going to copy it. It just means that they see what I've done and they look at it and they go, oh, that's interesting. And they follow it for a while until eventually they deviate to their own place.
Yeah. I mean, sort of. Yeah, I mean, it's a form of legacy, isn't it? It's a kind of, and especially, I don't know. I mean, I think every medium has its own legacy, its own resonance, its own legacy that kind of like stays with you, stays with the bigger, wider picture of things. I mean, I've always I was asked once sort of why designing posters, why designing flyers and posters were important for the work that I was doing within the immersive space, and it was because that they were the legacy. They were the flag that somebody in the future could look at and could trigger a memory of an experience that was essentially quite very ephemeral, very fleeting, because their experience was actually an emotion, and certainly with the poster artwork, that was a very, very kind of efficient way of disseminating those flags with the world. But equally, and I think even potentially even more powerfully, I think the sound world is I mean, much like smell, is so inherently linked to how we process memory and how we process emotion in the moment, but also historically as well.
Yeah.
And because so much of the sound work that I've done, over the years has been in these sort of large scale palaces of fleeting sort of ephemeral moments, distilling what that sound down into one particular thing or something which can be consumed has always been a tricky thing. And there's also a part of me which sort of just wants to leave it there as well. Sort of like leave it in this sort of mystical place of memory and emotion, and ultimately how a sort of soundscape transformed or supported your experience, and ultimately how you heard it will be different to how somebody else heard it as well. And so I think sound has become the challenge now to kind of especially with the projects that I'm making at the moment, where sound is very much at the foreground, is very much at the center of an experience, whereas historically there'd be lots of things to look at. This is just you're left with just your sound, your ears, and and how you feel in that moment.
When I can draw a lot of parallels as you were speaking on in terms of, but do you remember, because I remember perfectly this moment, when you took a picture and you developed that film,
Mm-hmm.
you put it in the projector, you get your paper, you do everything, and then suddenly you put that image into the wet for the first chemical, and suddenly that first image comes out. You know, do you remember the what you felt, or how? What was your what did you feel? What did you understand about the process of what you had done?
I'm just trying to think. I think sort of any sort of like fledgling sort of photographic image maker. I think I've seen some really crazy experimental stuff where it was just, like your hand would go down on the paper and then you'd create sort of a negative space. So I think there was the immediacy of that I really enjoyed, but there was a particular photograph that comes to mind that I'd made in Italy, actually, in Genoa. And it was just of some architecture. And I remember at the time, because the camera I was using was actually gifted to me by my late father, and he'd been gifted it from a client as part of a job. He was a solicitor, and his client sort of gifted him this Nikon FE 35mm camera and a couple of different lenses. And for some reason it sticks in my head now, but my dad was like, just always make sure that the shutter's at 125, because then you won't get any camera blur or anything like that. And then you work out the aperture around that, and then you find out about ISO, and and all of these things sort of go into making this image a successfully exposed image. And I remember seeing that emerge in the tray, and it was a very contrasty image. It was quite graphic. Lovely sort of curved architecture of some Italian archway, and the sun had hit it in just a way that it was quite abstract in a way. You couldn't quite work out what it was. It was just very much exploring sort of architecture and how light interacts with it, and how you can crop the world into something which pleases your eye, and you hope that pleases other people's eye as well. But again, much like those drawing sessions, it was a very, very quick and immediate way of communicating how I saw the world. And for a long period of time, it was seeing it in a 35mm ratio frame. But I think when you first start seeing it, the image emerge off a completely blank white piece of paper, and then somehow, and you put it in a completely clear liquid. There's nothing going on here other than some wild alchemy that you trick yourself into thinking you know what's going on, but you never fully appreciate exactly what's going on. But there's silver involved, and then you're thinking, how much silver is there in the world that can go into making my film? And I think sort of seeing that image emerge was it's quite literally like you much like when you make anything, it emerges out of all of the thought and the process that you put into it, whether you're carving something out of a block of marble, or whether you're painting something using acrylics or oils, or whether you're composing something on the piano, out of all of these ideas, all these thoughts and processes, literally in front of you, it emerges layer by layer, like sort of grain by grain, tone by tone, until you've overcooked it, so you have to start again. and then just like work out what the perfect grading is. But I think, thinking back on it, I think the sense of wonder, I think was incredible. It becomes quite addictive because and also the immediacy the immediacy within which you can have an effect on how that image comes out, based on exposure times and temperature of the water, and before we get into like Farmer's reduction, and you can sort of you can change the exposure after you've processed the image onto some photographic paper. So I think there was a real sense of wonder, and also a sense of feeling like that I'd found my medium. That I enjoyed drawing, but I wasn't the best. I wasn't the best drawer. I didn't think of myself as the best drawer. But with photography, and that image actually was the first sort of image where I'd felt like I'd found a style, found an aesthetic which felt right. It felt good. It felt good inside me, and just wanted to make more images, not just of that style, but just sort of, I don't know, just seeing the world in a particular way and then sharing the world in a particular way, felt very appealing. And like I said, I think I enjoyed it, and other people that were willing to look at my images enjoyed it as well. So I think sort of that external validation only kind of confirmed what I was sort of feeling inside and wanted more of. I think a sense of wonder, sense of excitement, a feeling of finding that way of communicating with the world that excites you and resonates with you was what was going on when I saw that tray.
What? So did you go to school for graphic design, for BA? What did you end up studying?
I did. I studied. The course was called photomedia, so it was lens-based art, which was in many ways it was as much a fine art degree as it was a lens-based kind of media degree. It was open. It was open enough to allow for discovery and exploration of what lens-based media can do and can communicate with the world, and that was very much left up to the individual student. I certainly had a growing appreciation for graphic design at the time, but didn't necessarily want to do a graphic design course, which I could have done. But what I found on the course that I was on was that I could make photographs, and then I could then provide the context for that photograph to be experienced, to be consumed in. So, it was creating fictional editorial magazine spreads or advertisements for what a collaboration between McDonald's and collaboration between McDonald's Happy Meals and YBAs would have looked like. So as part of your Happy Meal, you would have got a scaled down version of a Hearst cow in formaldehyde, which I still have. My mum still got it in her house. I actually made a version of it so I could photograph it and then put it in this sort of subverted McDonald's Happy Meal poster. But we had access to all range of cameras, and I actually shot that kind of that miniature version of a Hearst cow in formaldehyde on a 5.4 camera. So wow. It was. It was, also, I was studying photography at that point just before digital kind of started coming in. So I do feel fortunate, actually, that I studied at that time, because it meant that I had had an education and an appreciation of that wet chemical process that had been the way from the beginning, to then see this digital kind of, at the time it was an intrusion, this devil's work, but seeing that filter in, and ultimately seeing the benefits of all whatever you're making, there is an appropriate process for it. And actually, I remember we had a Canon. Remember that early Canon digital camera that Danny Boyle used for some of 28 Days Later? It was red and white. And we had one of those that came in, and we had one of those in stock that we could hire out. And then you find out that Danny Boyle's using it to create a film that you can go and see in the cinema, and suddenly so many boundaries and so many barriers to entry were removed that that ultimately kit is just kit. It's the thought and the idea and the context within which you're making stuff, which is the important thing. But I also remember at that time, because following doing my degree, I actually went back to the same college to be a technician. And I was a technician there for a while. And this was when I was having a much more growing interest in sound and the importance of sound, not just within a kind of immersive theatrical experience, but also just within, film media, television. It was also around the time the Blair Witch Project had come out. And I remember distinctly at the time reading something about how that film came to be as kind of prolific and as influential as it was. And it was that the film company that eventually bought it to distribute it, the only money they spent on it was on sound. And it was at that point where I sort of realized that people very, very rarely forgive bad sound. But when it comes to visuals, it can be grainy, it can be distorted, and that is part of the aesthetic, and that is part of the visual aspect of it. But but sound won't be forgiven. So it was a real eye opener, or ear opener for me to sort of realise that the only thing that they added to that was to improve the experience of the sound within that film experience. And I remember at the time, students would come and hire out cameras, and I go, "So what are you doing?" And they're like, "I'm going to do an interview, or I'm going to do some field recordings, whatever." I was like, "Have you thought about how you're going to record the sound?" As I'm getting out like bags full of Sennheiser shotgun and rifle microphones and big fluffy booms to go over it and all this kind of stuff. And they're like, "No, I won't need that. I'll just use the on camera microphone." And I was like, "Okay, but but I think you should really, really explore, how using this kit, the most appropriate kit, can improve your level of production." Whether they listened or not, who knows? But it's something I still carry forward today. That that grain and distortion is they're charming. What is not charming is sound which hurts you.
Choppy audio is never great,
It's never great. Grainy, unless it's intentionally grainy. It's all about the intention behind it. But you've got to start on the best foot.
I always have a joke that no one listens to the audio people.
They very rarely. They're brought in last on everything, and they're expected to tidy up everything. I've not had a huge amount of experience working on films, but I've been around enough bits and pieces where it's and watched enough things where sound recordists are like, "Please just put some carpet down, but please, can we just have half an hour just to go and record the ambient sound of the room, or how that teapot sounds when it's dropped on the floor in that space, and how essential it is to creating an authentic world within moving image, within theatre, within an immersive experience, within, I think, any kind of media-based experience, culture-based experience. It's it's paramount, I think.
There's a great phrase that says, "I can't see, I just can't hear anything."
Yes. Can't see. I don't know if you ever had this, but my I remember being in the car listening to the radio, and it maybe being a little too loud for my mum while she was driving, and she'd ask me to turn it down. She's like, "Turn that down, because I can't concentrate, or I can't see." Sort of similar sort of vibe, isn't it? Where it's sort of,
it overpowers the so many other senses that eventually it counteracts. Yeah, I used to have that. I remember that happened to me with my mother when we were driving from France back to Italy, and we had to go drive down that long tunnel, which is like 35-40 minutes of driving inside the tunnel. And my mom was like, "Please tone that down because I really need to concentrate." And I was like, "Yes, ma'am."
Yeah, but it's but I find myself doing that now as well. So I totally understand it. It's sort of like, "Well, turn that down, I can't think." Whereas historically, putting some sort of music on was was an aid to thinking, to that sort of cognitive process. Moreover, if I was doing something visual, but obviously, if I'm composing a piece of music or making some sound, it's essential that I can hear it.
So then, it's almost like what happened first, the chicken or the egg. So you obviously care about sound, and at which point do you jump from being a technician at the university or at the college to working with Punchdrunk? Like, what's the bridge in there, or was there a bridge, or was that something that just happened?
Okay. They coexisted for a very long time, for a good sort of 5 or 6 years. In those early days of Punchdrunk, generally the shows were opened in the autumn or the beginning of winter because it was darker. It was more magical. Like, seasonally, it made more sense. It was this witching hour kind of time, which meant that most of the production that happened on these projects would happen during the summer months. And because I worked in a university, I was able to work for term time, build up enough toil, time owed in lieu, and I was able to take most of the summer off, which meant that I could take my technician hat off and put my sound designer and graphic designer, because in those early days I was doing the graphic design for promotional materials, but also in show kind of art assets and artifacts. And it was actually a very, very beneficial relationship that I was able to really dedicate time to both. So yeah, I was able to work on these large sort of scale Punchdrunk shows over the summer. They would open in the autumn, and then I'd go back. I go back to technicianing.
But how did you get involved? Did you meet Felix, or did you? How did it happen?
It was very much. I don't know. It's right place, right time. I think there was clearly a big coming out of the 90s and coming out of that sort of quite significant sort of. It felt like a real paradigm shift in how things were made. Sort of that it wasn't making music, making things weren't exclusively the rights of those that had all the money in the world and all of the stuff in the world, that creativity was born out of ultimately doing the best with what you've got. So I think at that point there was a sort of a melting pot, a kind of bubbling up of just sort of a load of people that share the similar sort of creative sensibility, and a couple of my very good friends that I went to school with, and I'm still good friends with them now. They ended up going to university down in Exeter, which is where Punchdrunk was born out of. And I wasn't involved in anything that they were doing within the university, their time at university. Because there was a whole group of people that were kind of involved in those early days and still are in many ways with what Punchdrunk is up to. It was the first show that came to London, and my very good friend at the time, his girlfriend was the designer for that show that came to London, because she was studying architecture and she had an interest in creating worlds. And that was the first show that I ever did anything on, and that was nothing sound based, because wasn't the budget for anything like that at the time. I was doing photography and creating the graphic design for the posters and the flyers. But it was Sleep No More 2003, I think it was, which was the first show that I did sound on. I was also still doing the graphics and photo stuff. But whilst I was exploring photography and graphic design, I always had a keen enjoyment and just a fan of music. And coming out of, coming to the end of the 90s, early 2000s, music technology equipment had plummeted in price, which meant that I could buy a sampler. And when I realised that all the hip hop that I was listening to, all the De La Souls and the Tribe Called Quests and Jurassic 5s of the worlds, when I realised that all of the music that I was listening to was essentially made from tiny little bits of old 60s and 70s and 80s soul and sort of funk music, I thought, wow, I could give this a go. I could sort of try making my own music, and it sort of went from there, really, from having a sampler which could sample 3 seconds worth of audio and then eking out as much as you could from that, to upgrading to a bigger sampler, making beats on that, making tracks on that, and then evolving to a digital DAW, where you've got infinite, possibility, infinite time. But everything that I'd learned working on very restrictive, limited sort of samplers meant that I carried that discipline through, and it was about eking as much as you could out of a found sampled guitar tone or a string tone, and drenching it in reverb and delay, and basically taking that one little fragment and extending it so it became tens of seconds long instead of 1 second long. And that kind of aesthetic really, really married well with the dreamlike world that we were trying to create within a Punchdrunk experience, where time became irrelevant. It became something which we wanted to sort of draw out, so you weren't aware of how long you were in something, the duration of it, and all of the sort of baggage that comes with, just knowing how long something will last for. We wanted people to sort of go deep into that experience and get lost in it, and creating these, sort of quite dreamlike drone soundscapes was the perfect sort of fit for that experience, where there was no real recognizable melody or kind of rhythm. It was actually just about being in this sort of sonic soup in a way, where it was there the whole time, supporting your journey, but wasn't necessarily directing where you were going, unless we wanted to, and that's where bigger found pieces of music, or bigger music which had a much bigger statement attached to it, came in, and they were saved for those moments of sort of much greater in sort of spectacle, I suppose, or where if there was a group scene or a set piece or something which just needed some sort of musical punctuation to really convey the story, because to this day a lot of those masked shows don't have any dialogue, so the way that emotion and narrative was delivered was through all of the elements that we had at our disposal. So it's at the heart of it is the performer communicating the story through a physical language, but then you have all of the theatrical arts and crafts that we drew upon to create these worlds. So lighting and sound and smell and touch all became narrative drivers in their own way, and each one became the primary driver at different points within that. So sometimes sound would be the thing that leads you. Sometimes just purely walking into a room and rifling through desks becomes the narrative driver. And sometimes a performer doing incredible things with their body becomes the narrative driver. There was a real and still is a real kind of palpable kind of sense of satisfaction, actually, when all of those things come together, and it's the sum of its parts, and that creates the thing. Nothing sort of.
I've probably seen Sleep No More about 30 times, by the way.
Yeah.
And the first time I went, obviously I was following somebody, and second time I was following somebody else. And then eventually it's like, okay, I've done the main characters, I've done the secondaries, I've done the tertiaries. And so then I started to stay in rooms and seeing how the room evolved in 45 minutes and the way that it was occupied and how stories would come in, because I had at that point such a nice understanding of the entire world that I was able to look at things like that, which I found really interesting. And then I got to see Sleep No More in Shanghai, and I was like immediately trying to find the comparisons and the elements and the extra sounds that were added to the show and why they were there. And it was a really interesting, I would say, class of understanding all these things and education of how all those sounds that you were making and how they met all the other movements and the sounds, like everything that you're talking about. It was really interesting.
It's been a real gift to be able to see that show through so many different variations of it as well. From the very beginning, where we had 2 sound zones, and I think with the version that's now in Seoul, I think we're up to sort of 30 odd sound zones. And that's not necessarily 30 hours of more sound or music. It's using sound in a more evolved way, where we're playing with distance. We have a reverbed version of a track that's playing in a room 4 doors down, but actually intentionally putting that echo of it in another part of the building. Just experientially, that's quite exciting, but also as a foreshadowing for, you hear the echo of it before you get to it, and then when you get to it, you get the full meat of the track. But there are loads of different ways of experiencing it. You can experience it.
I gotta ask though, walk me through, if you can, how do you make it? Like, what is the thought process? Because obviously, understanding multi-zones and understanding anyone who's walked through a show, it's. I mean, at least it's incredibly complex.
I think with anything complex, it's just trying to find the simplest, trying to find the simplest way through, which makes sense for you that's making it, but also that will ultimately make sense for those that are experiencing it as well. Certainly over the years, there was a desire to kind of cram as much stuff, sonic stuff, into these experiences as possible. But there's a point at which you have to listen to the building. You have to appreciate the building itself and how much sound separation you've got. One of the slides that I put up in one of the talks I do is 5mm plywood is not a good sound insulator. And to be fair, my experience of working with essentially theatre flats, like flats that have been created out of 5mm plywood on a wooden frame background, only came much later when we were exploring spaces which were much bigger and needed a much bigger build. But in those earlier shows and early experiences, the building itself had much more of a presence, much more of a character. And you could see it and you could touch it a lot more. And a lot of the buildings we were working in were very old buildings. I mean, Steeple Moor was in an old Victorian school in Kennington Oval kind of area. So to enter into a room, there was one door. So that threshold, and the walls were a foot thick, 3 feet thick or whatever. So you immediately had some sound separation there. So in some ways it was, I'm not going to say easier, but it sort of allowed for having very disparate sort of music sources playing in different rooms because there was a separation between them. But as the shows grew and as spaces became, different spaces were being used, it's very much about leaning into the fact that what you're hearing in one room will be heard in the next room. So there's a responsibility on my part to try and make sense of that. But those constraints are then communicated with the directing team and the choreographic team and the narrative, So, and then it's about trying to make sense of, well, if you can hear this piece of music or this sound in this room, in the next room, while this scene's going on, can this scene work with the sound that's going on in the next room? And if it can't, then can it be moved somewhere else? So there's quite a lot of give and take in the process, where there's a dream and there's a desire for this scene to happen in this room with this sound, but then in the actual practical experience of it is that, well, it can't really happen because the bleed from the next room or the bleed from the room behind it is going to infect that space and infect that scene. So we either lean into it and that a version of that sound from the next room, whether it's just a chord or a tone that's carried over, or the full song is carried over, or the full piece of music is carried over, and sometimes that sort of rather serendipitously has a really interesting effect because it's a constraint that's outside of your control, and suddenly by juxtaposing a joyful piece of music or a deeply dark drone or something, suddenly you're forced to look at the juxtaposition of that piece of music with that scene. And sometimes it works brilliantly, and you're playing with those counterpoints that you're kind of, they're doing something incredibly dark or menial or kind of like quite pedestrian. but there's a pop song playing or a lighter piece of music playing. And what does that do to the scene? Does that almost conflicting counterpoint make it more interesting? Does it actually sort of spark up more questions than sort of answers? So then it becomes, I think working sort of zonally. There's for me, there's always a desire to give each zone its own particular flavour. And in speaking about sort of just making things very simple, it's sort of to give each zone its own flavour. But it can have its own flavour, but it can share the same key. You can have a dark sea, and you can have a very light, very happy sea. So then it becomes about quality of sound and textures. And just how the air is being moved in those spaces. Something which is very deep and bassy and resonant, can be in the same key as the next room you walk into, which is much more ethereal or kind of much more in the higher register. But they work in harmony together. So this sort of harmony was the thing which kind of was a realization I had on a project we did in the Waterloo tunnels years ago, a project called Tunnel 228, where there was no separation between the tunnels, and we had this sort of curated, immersive art exhibition which had performance in it, but each tunnel needed its own soundtrack. But there was no division. They just had these big openings between each one, so there was no division, no real insulation between them. So then it was very much about making something which worked in harmony with each other, but was distinct enough that when you entered into a new space, it felt like you were entering into something new, something that felt authentic to what you were seeing with your eyes, or what you were smelling, or what you were walking on, or what you were touching. So yeah, I think just sort of keeping harmony in the back of my mind was the thing which was a driver, which was a sort of a key realization in creating multi-zonal audio. That's not to say that there can be moments of discordance, but that discordance is intentional. It's not a product of just throwing things that you like at it and then it not working together. Those moments of discordance are like, we want that moment of discordance there. And then that needs to be acknowledged in the spaces around it. So it's about carving out the space for that moment of discordance to happen. But for the most time, it's when audiences have that much agency. I think sort of making sure that their journey through the space is as seamless as possible, so that they're not distracted by something which is jarring or discordant. I think it allows them to almost relax that part of their sort of sensory system, so they can then take in what they're about to see. And some of the physical performance is quite challenging. It's quite provocative. It's quite gory, at times as well. So I think so just making sure that sonic experience is as seamless and almost I hate saying this, but like it's the thing that you can take for granted. Like you can almost become something that you ignore. But if it wasn't there, you'd know it. So I think that's an interesting sort of realization as well.
I think that what it does is it grounds you, and it kind of holds you together so that you're allowed to fly somewhere else. But that, when I wrote Nierka back in 2010, 11, there's a scene there's a guitar that Dottore played, which was and that repeats through the entire scene. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then like the drums, the way that we did it is it would always go dan, 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 dan. And then the next bit, they could do whatever they wanted. And then back to a dan, 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 dan.
Mm-hmm.
And then the bass was on a 7, but it was playing every third tempo. So it was like, da, da,
mm-hmm.
da. And so suddenly it's like it. And then the other guitar was doing something different. And then the piano was doing something else. And then the strings were doing something where the viola was passing the same note to the cello, passing it to the violin, then back to the viola. So basically it was like, you can't hang on to anything. Mm-hmm. The only thing that you can hang on to is the which is the worst sound that you want to hold on to. But by allowing that to exist, it just grounded everything to a space. And you're holding into this, and then suddenly there's the explosion of sound when everyone comes together, and the release of the audience of like, only to realize visually that this person is being attacked, and there's like, and then just creating that juxtaposition was just like, okay, this is an interesting one. So, and I think that's when I go through that kind of show, through your Punchdrunk shows, that's mm-hmm. what it does is the music is constant. The music is there. It plays around, but it always holds and grounds me on a regular basis to what's mm-hmm. happening on the play. But then what's really funny is if we think about Beyond the Road, mm-hmm. right? Where suddenly it's like, here's Saatchi Gallery, here's a bunch of stems, and guess what? The walls are not tall enough.
Yeah.
So you start using basically the spaces that you have and the resonance and the flats and everything, and then in comes Saatchi Gallery, right?
Yep.
So talk to me about UNKLE. And our good friend James Lavelle.
Our good friend James Lavelle. UNKLE and Wider Picture Mowax was just such a hugely inspirational kind of record label and an individual. As I was growing up, it was essentially doing the thing we all wanted to do. We all wanted to have a record label. We all wanted to make music and put records out. But more than that, we all wanted to have the clothes, the toys, the access to Futura, work with all manner of amazing artists. So the opportunity to actually work on a project with James and the UNKLE project was a bit of a pinch yourself moment where you couldn't quite believe it was going to happen.
So I remember seeing you at the listening party in Soho and wondering, like, what are you doing here? Like, I know why I'm here, but what are you doing here?
Well, because also I didn't know why you were there as well, and sort of didn't find that out until later on that you were sort of creative director, lighting designer for the UNKLE shows. So. And obviously, we'd met on another job, totally unrelated. Which, so it was. I sort of lost count of the amount of moments in sort of my life and career where all those things join up, and I don't know. It's sort of the universe makes itself very clear that you were supposed to have met this person, and you were supposed to have worked with them on this car project, so you could then create something. Something uniquely kind of original and enabled everyone involved to make a new piece of work, explore something that was interesting to them. But the UNKLE, the Beyond the Road at Saatchi, that really came out of a conversation that Colin Nightingale and myself were having around the idea of sort of having access to the stems for a recorded piece of music, and because at the time there was a lot of production, sort of a lot of DJs doing remixes of tracks, but because they'd been given access to the original master tapes, so you had a lot of, I mean, even Madlib with his the Blue Note sort of album that he did, he had access to the Blue Note original master tapes and then did his own version of them. And there were a lot of people remixing Prince tracks and Michael Jackson tracks and Jackson 5 tracks and Marvin Gaye tracks because they had access to the studio masters. So I think sort of, having our kind of experiential hats on, we were sort of thinking, okay, if we had access to some stems of a piece of music, deconstructed it and then reconstructed it across a 3-dimensional space. Quite a simple proposition. Would that be interesting? Would that be cool? And at the time, and I think this was 2017 or 18, I think.
17.
Yeah. At the time, James was putting some new music out. It had been a while, I think, since he put some music out. And he was putting out this first of definitely a duo, potentially. I think it was going to be more, but an album based around this idea, The Road. The album was called The Road, and then there was a Road Part 2, which sort of came the following year. And Colin and I both heard the lead track of The Road, the track called The Road, and it was definitely a new sound for James and the UNKLE project at the time, but still had all of the hallmarks, all the tropes of his particular sort of style of sort of collage music production, which is it's very cinematic. There's strings, there's atmospheric sounds, it's euphoric at times, but also kind of very emotional, sort of has an emotional core to it as well.
Eska's voice on it is amazing too.
Eska's voice on it was phenomenal, and that was one take apparently. Like they went back and did some sort of overdubs and backing vocals, but I think the main vocal was just like she just ripped it straight from her heart and put it on the track. And we had a mutual friend in Doug Foster, who we'd worked with on Tunnel 228, actually, the project I mentioned earlier, and he provided a piece for that. So we had a connection with Doug Foster. We knew that Doug was providing a lot of visuals for James's tracks. And for those that don't know, Doug Foster makes these beautifully sort of kaleidoscopic, hypnotic, visual sort of video installations where you can totally get lost in these sort of scaled up video installations. And when we were thinking about who to approach for the music, James was releasing music at the time, and we kind of went via Doug to get an intro. And through Doug, we sort of got to Jane and James, and I was invited. Well, Colin and I were both invited to the listening event in Soho, which in itself was different and was unique because it was in a cinema, and you weren't just sat in a recording studio listening to playback on some speakers. You were bathed in sound and visuals that went with each track. And Colin couldn't make it to that, so I went on my own. And I think by this point, I think there was buy-in, but it still felt like there was a little bit of pitching that needed to be done. But yeah, anyway, so I chatted with Jane and James that night. Also chatted with you, of course, because it was a pleasant surprise to bump into you. And yeah, before we knew it, we'd been sent over the stems for the road, for us to play around with. And at the time, Colin and I were both still quite heavily involved with Punchdrunk, and we had a space up in Tottenham, which was sort of fully kitted out with a zonal sound system. So it meant that we were able to trial this idea out. So we went in. We secured a couple of days to try it out, and we separated all the stems across. I think it was about a 9,000 or 10,000 square foot space, and
it was big.
2 warehouses. So the space had structures built within them as well. So we had rooms that you could walk in and out of, as well as bigger open spaces as well. And I mean, literally from the moment that we pressed play, and all of these stems were sent to different parts of this space that we had access to. It was a definite light bulb moment. So, well, this works, and it was immediately. It was a very interesting idea. A lot of UNKLE's music over its history. It's essentially dance music. There is a rhythm. There's a groove to it. But as a part of the beginning process, we knew that much like those early days of Punchdrunk, when I was drawing sounds out, stretching them, and making instruments become more textural or tonal. We kind of had a hunch that we would need to remove, or at least contain, any rhythmic element to it, because we wanted people to explore the space, but we wanted people to explore the music. And our hunch was that if there was any kind of rhythmic element to it, then that would, much like, watching a clock count down, like it puts a container on the length, the duration of your experience, and also the rhythm and the pace at which you experience it. So for this version, we contained the drum track in a room that you couldn't even get into.
The angry kid. I remember we used to call it the angry kid.
the angry kid. His bedroom is what we imagined it, and he would be banging away on the drums up there. And then the room directly beneath it was where we put Eska's vocal.
Yes.
And that was her bedroom. And the kid's bedroom was upstairs. So you had this sort of ethereal vocal and these very rhythmic, driving drums kind of coming from the room above. And it was very much about leaning into the fact that there was going to be bleed between the two. And that room, that angry kid bedroom had a window on it. So when the drums did come in, you could hear them in the distance, but you had to go and find them. But which meant that for the rest of the space, we were really exploring the kind of the more ambient, kind of non-rhythmical elements of the track, and there was so much to play with. There was sort of kind of emotional strings, soaring strings. There was beautiful just sort of pads that kind of floated around in the space, and we had reverbed backing vocals kind of echoing in the corners of the warehouses, and then other sort of key motifs that would pop up in different spaces. And I remember we had the piano part of the track in one room, and then we had the guitar part of the track in another room, and that room was just separated by a single doorway, which didn't have a door in it. So it meant that you could kind of straddle the threshold between the two rooms, and effectively, if you wanted more piano, you could stand more in the piano room, and if you wanted more guitar, you could stand more in the guitar room. so then it became actually quite a physical act, that you had agency to become almost like your own mix engineer. But instead of putting the volume up on a fader, you just walked closer to it, or you put your head more in one room than the other room. And we explored what extending that track from, I think it's about 6 or 7 minutes long. We extended that to about 15 minutes.
I remember programming the lighting to that. The whole thing.
You very graciously came along to play with us and create a lighting design which responded to not only the track but the individual parts of the track that were being played in their own room. So then each room required its own kind of look and feel and sort of rhythm in the lighting design that echoed the music. And we got to a place where I think we were all pretty happy with what we'd made in literally like 2 or 3 days, something like that. And we invited James along, and I think he was a bit overwhelmed, actually. I think he came out, and after making music in essentially a studio where you receive a stereo image, you get a left and a right image, and that's how you experience the music. For him suddenly to literally be able to walk through the music that he'd created, I think was a wonderful moment for all of us, because we kind of had a hunch that this would be interesting. But it recontextualized the music for him, in particular, because he'd been used to experiencing it in a particular way for so long. And suddenly it wasn't just in front of him on 2 speakers playing in front of him or in headphones. It was all around. And that was just with one track. And I think we did another sharing with some invited.
Yes,
guests.
I remember that. Yeah. I wasn't able to go, but I remember James calling me and going, "You know this thing? Yeah, we're going to do something bigger."
Oh yeah. That was always going to be the way, and Colin and I knew, we knew that we had to explore it outside of that space as well, because the space that we were experimenting in had such a clear identity. It was very much it's very much a world that we knew, but both Colin and I wanted to explore a visual world and a sonic world that ultimately was beyond what we had known, which was another reason why we called it Beyond the Road, because it was taking the experience of an album beyond headphone or speaker experience, but it was also us taking ourselves beyond what we'd known so far, taking us beyond our own practice and to a place where we were exploring sort of what it meant to be artists, kind of curators, kind of designers in our own right. Through sharing that experiment with a few key people, we suddenly found ourselves with an opportunity to present it on the top floor of the Saatchi Gallery. It was very much championed by Philly Adams, who was the sort of head curator at the Saatchi at the time, and fitted very nicely. It fit very nicely with what she had planned for the Saatchi Gallery, whilst Beyond the Road was going to be happening, which was an exhibition celebrating rave culture. And sort of, probably not by chance, it was probably very much considered. We had this ambient kind of Beyond the Road experience sat at the top floor of the Saatchi Gallery, and then everything underneath it was this exhibition celebrating rave culture. And we like to think that Beyond the Road was like the ultimate chill out room. That if you were at the rave on the floors 1 and 2 at the Saatchi, that the Beyond the Road was this place where you could go for a sort of some slightly contemplative, meditative kind of respite. But having knowing that we could, knowing that we were going to present Beyond the Road on a much bigger scale across the top floor of the Saatchi Gallery meant that we got to really mine and really get into the kind of the visual world and the sort of artistic art, the art world that was orbiting James at the time. From artists like Nathan Coley and John Stark and Jonas Berger, to video pieces by Norbert Schörner, and we were able to do an edit of Roma because one of the tracks that James had produced, Alfonso Cuarón was a huge fan of. We had some stuff in there from Danny Boyle as well, from the series Trust. But the way that we'd laid out the exhibition and the installation meant that we wanted to create pieces that were been made in response to not just the music, but also presenting the music in a new context, which meant that we approached you to see if you were interested in being part of this exhibition. And it also meant that that Colin and myself were able to kind of imagine a new world that this music could be experienced in. And it was very much a world of colour and exploring colour theory and sort of how colour can shift an emotional response and how the colour and lighting can shift in relationship with the music, and how that would inform your experience. Meant that we could create sculptures of trees that were seemingly floating in the midair, and we were able to make a dining table that was 6 meters long and covered in hundreds of kilograms of melted wax that shifted color under the different lighting. And we were able to make some fun stuff. We had vocals coming out of telephone booths that we'd made, and of course, when we spoke to you, you were interested in using this holoplot technology, which was it holoplot? No, not holoplot. Hypervision.
Hypervision.
Holoplots, the speakers. Hypervision. Which is in the sphere, which also connects us with him. But which I'm happy to talk about if you want, but maybe this is an opportunity for you to.
No, really. What I think is, the pieces, and I is something that I loved, and the fact that I got to work with Sonia and everything that we did around it. But what was really funny for me when we're doing Beyond the Road is obviously I was working with James already. And then I was working with Danny at the same time on a completely different project. And suddenly I found myself doing a show at Coco with James, and then having Danny watching the show at the same time for a completely different reason. Mm-hmm. And it became a moment in my life in which I would be with Danny. James would call Danny. James will talk to Danny, and then Danny would be like, "Oh yeah, I'm here with Tupac," and then James would be like, "Oh, pass me to him," and then I would be on the phone talking to James, and then sometimes I would be with James, and it will happen exactly the other way. Mm-hmm. And it was just this really funny thing about how the entire world kind of came together. And I have a brilliant picture because on the opening night we put a camera inside of the sculpture, mm-hmm. of the installation, and because the mirror was two-way mirror. There's a picture of Danny like watching the piece come to life and going, I've
actually got that mirror in my house.
Oh, do you? Nice.
I mean, that's fascinating, isn't it? So having witnessing a real time, honest reaction to something is it's a very rare thing these days. And
yeah,
but that piece was so magical, and it was also a really. If my memory serves, I think it was. I remember the discussion we were having around it in your studio when you were down in Bermondsey, and you were very interested in this holographic technology, because you also had a holographic machine thing in your studio at the same time. But there was something about this which obviously allowed for us to explore at scale. So the Sonia's dancing figure could almost be life size, and I think there was something interesting in that, and there was something uncanny in that, and I think the scale was important. I think if it was small, it would just be almost a silly novelty, and if it was too big, then again, but having it near enough to life size, I think, really helped with that. Just really helped with the trick, really. And I think also Colin and I were both coming from the place of, yes, there's going to be loads of technology in this installation, but we can't show the technology. It can't be on show. So how can we make sense of this seemingly sort of ghostly floating figure? And I think we all landed on this idea of it existing behind a mirror. So you'd be looking at yourself in the mirror, but then at times your reflection would disappear and would be replaced with this kind of glitchy, notched dancing figure that was based on something real. It was based on a human performance, but had been treated and manipulated in such a way that completely changed it into something new, something that was still human, but was digital, but then it was floating. So there was, I don't know, the screen was the mirror, and I think for us that was a key thing for us, that we deliberately kept screens out of the exhibition and wanted to make everything feel as analog as it could, and just sort of having that mirror barrier, and then something appear beyond it, really just tick the box of of that sort of almost supernatural. You saw it in Danny's face. It's like, there she is.
When because we showed that then in Seoul, and then I asked you guys last year to show it here in Lisbon.
Yeah.
And it was amazing, the reaction. Even though there was in this case projecting against the wall, nothing made, but just using the camera to feed back into it and have this element, and then Sonia to come out. And there's a moment where we're just in the gallery here. And there's that voice when you talk about love, you make me feel invisible.
Yeah.
And it's just like, it's such a nice piece in that sense of how well it merges with the tonality of what the album was all about. So yeah.
Oh, totally, yeah.
It's also, a piece that I'm really happy about.
That line to this day cuts to my very core. It's Michel Lamy just sort of saying it's so powerful. It's so powerful. Yeah.
So what's really interesting, so at that point you kind of go, all right, I kind of like this artistic lifestyle of things. And so then you start moving towards installation work, technically. I mean, not installation, but installation work in that.
Yeah, it's still very experiential, but based around an installation. Colin and I both coming from the world of Punchdrunk. We've made work in immense scale over the years, and when making work at that scale, there are so many things that need to align for that work to happen. Landlords, buildings, insurance, kind of Arts Council grants, budgets, people's availability, like literally everything factors into whether a project can happen of that scale. And the world's got a lot wiser to it as well. Back in the day, you could get a meantime space building for next to nothing, and you get nice discounts on rates and all this kind of stuff. But as a company like Punchdrunk grows and grows and grows, and their profile grows and grows and grows, and it stops being a charity and becomes being a commercial entity, a lot of those favourable rates become less and less and less. They diminish. So the sort of frequency at which those projects were happening became less. There was less opportunity. Obviously, we presented Sleep No More in Shanghai, and we've also presented it in Seoul. So there were opportunities that we could still explore outside of the UK, but within the UK, it was the scale and the ambition of the work was getting to such heights that it was becoming sort of nigh on impossible to make work like that. So Colin and I were sort of in this sort of situation where we were keen to make work, and that's where Beyond the Road came out of, and we sidestepped our role within Punchdrunk at the time to focus on making this Beyond the Road project. And as you said, we did that, and we got a bit of a taste for it. And admittedly, for a first project outside of Punchdrunk, like it was still at scale. We were working across 11,000 square feet, and that project took a lot to get on. To sort of make it happen. And we were very fortunate enough to be able to revisit in Seoul. We had a very supportive producer that believed in the project and was able to make it happen. And it ran for a good 6 months in Seoul and was very well received. But I think we always knew in the back of our minds that for us to keep making work that excited us and interested us, and a lot of the work that we wanted to be making was about putting music and sound at the forefront, like at the heart of the experience. We knew, we just had a hunch that we probably needed to explore projects which didn't require 20, 30, 40 rooms, didn't require tens of thousands of feet of space, square feet of space. The challenge for us was like, can we make work which still has that impact, still has that emotional impact, but with sort of minimal intervention. And we knew the things that we had control over, and that was the music and the sound. And if we were aligning ourselves with good sort of world-leading sound partners, and we have good relationships with D&B and L Acoustics, that we'd be able to explore this ever-expanding world of sort of spatial audio, and also exploring what it means to compose a piece of music that is going to be experienced spatially, and that sounds sort of more prescriptive than it actually is in reality, because I think it's just having in the back of your mind that when you're composing a piece of music for a spatial environment, it's just knowing that sounds can move. They don't have to move, but they can move with a swell in some strings. That can actually become almost a physical experience, not just an aural experience, where you're aware that sound is swelling from behind you and coming around your left, and then peaking in front of you, and then diminishing as it goes off to out into the further reaches of the room, because this technology, this Soundscape or Elisa, allows you to create these spaces which are bigger than the space you're in. So we were very interested in what could we make a project which exists in one room, but still kind of elicit that kind of that emotional impact, that emotional response that we've seen in the much larger scale work that we've done. We sort of, I mean, our first foray into that work was a project called The Retiring Room, which we presented at the Standard Hotel. And it was our first collaboration with a composer friend of ours called Toby Young, who we'd worked with on some other projects previously within the Punchdrunk world. And I mean, that project purely came out of wanting to make a sort of a deep listening project where the music was the thing that took you on the journey. That is, the music was the thing which allowed for you to either follow the narrative of the music or create your own narrative within you experiencing the music. And was presented at the Standard Hotel because a very good friend of mine was the GM at the Standard Hotel, and we were just coming out of lockdown, and occupancy at hotels was pretty low. So they had a lot of rooms which weren't being used, and full credit to Ellie. She was very aware that for a hotel to succeed, she needed to create a community of creatives within it. And I think the room down the hall from the one we were using was occupied by Harris Reed, who had who was developing their collection, and obviously gone on to sort of be the creative director of Nina Ricci, I think. So they were down there doing their thing, and we were offered a room that they call the cozy core rooms at the Standard, and they're rooms that are at the core of the building which don't have any windows to the outside, so there's no daylight. And in a marvelous act of spin, they were like perfect for those that want to stay on the same time zone of the country you're traveling from, or if you really just want to kind of have total sensory deprivation so you can sleep. These rooms are perfect for that, and they were kitted out. It's quite dark walls, dark ceiling, and the shower and the toilet area was all hidden behind a glass wall, which had Venetian blinds sort of down the front of it. So it felt like you were looking out from your room to the outside world. So what the Retiring Room became was very much in response to the fact that we were in a hotel room, and that we had access to this, essentially a light box, a big glass light box, which we frosted with some frosting film, put a couple of big lights behind it, and in sync with the music, that light box, which wasn't immediately visible because it had disappeared because you weren't aware of it because you had Venetian blinds in front of it, suddenly became the light source for a particular part of the music, which would take you. Our goal with that one was to sort of feel like you were ascending, because the experience was you lying down on the bed, and you just experiencing the music. And there were certain points of the music which would really soar and kind of take you to quite a ethereal kind of place. And we were kind of exploring the idea of sort of circadian rhythms as well, just the idea of sort of like what it is to go to sleep and wake up, and how that light at dawn, or that sunlight coming through a window, is one of the key things to sort of either reset your circadian rhythm or just keep it on track. So it was very much about kind of, although you were invited to lay down on the bed and you could keep your eyes open or you keep your eyes closed, it was up to you. There was a moment where the music would soar, and then you were suddenly bathed in this very sort of like womb-like light. And I mean, the thing that I was wanted to achieve with that was just even with your eyes closed, you can feel light on your skin, you know, and close your eyes and that glow that you get through your eyelids, you know, it's just such a magical, warm feeling. And I just really like the idea that even if you're lying there with your eyes closed, that you would feel the light kind of wash over you. And then we had a very good response to that. It was only there for like about a week or 10 days. We were very, very grateful for the Standard and for their generosity in allowing us to use one of their rooms for that project. But because it was a hotel room, it was only for one person at a time. And, you know, for that person, they would arrive at the hotel, they go to the check-in desk and they say, I'm here to check into the retiring room. And the retiring room name actually came from the Indian Railway network system that Colin had actually travelled on many years prior, where after you'd been on a very, very long train journey, at certain railway stations, there were actually rooms called the retiring rooms, where you could rent a bed for a night or an hour or 6 hours or however long you wanted, just to rest and recuperate before you went on the next leg of your train journey. And because as we were being toured around the Standard, at King's Cross in London, they were talking about how so much of the interior design had been influenced by the fact that they were so close to King's Cross Station and golden age of rail. And that suddenly triggered in our head. It was like, Colin was like, there's this thing called the retiring room. So we called it the retiring room, which was, sort of a nice nod to rail travel, and also the fact that it was supposed to be, it was our first sort of entry into that world of kind of art and wellness, the crossover between the two, and sort of what that space could look like. So you turn up and you check into the retiring room and you find your way to the room, you let yourself in, and then when the experience came to an end, you would then let yourself out, and you hand the key card back in, and then the next person would come through. But it was only ever for one person, which as a business model is terrible, because you can only have so many people go through a day. I think at a peak, we had about 12 people go through or something like that, which for those 12 people is wonderful. But as a business model, I think it'd be quite an exclusive experience. So our next challenge from that was, what's the multiplayer version? Like, how do we scale this up? How do we make something which can be experienced by more than one person, but still have that impact, still have that kind of, that emotional resonance, which is where we landed on, our sort of flagship sort of deep listening experience that's currently up in a National Trust property up in Cheshire, where it's been for 6 months, embedded in the house, in the stately home that they have up there. It's a project called Origin, and actually, weirdly, the origins of Origin go all the way back to Beyond the Road. And I don't know if you remember, but as you entered Beyond the Road, you walked into essentially an empty room, but the first visual that you would see through an arched doorway was that scale model of a tree that was perfectly white, but magically shifted colours depending on what the lighting state was doing at the time. And thinking back to observing audiences, guests sort of experiencing Beyond the Road, there was a particular moment where Colin had observed an audience member circling that tree for, I think, what was about an hour or something like that. And there was something, we sort of, we knew that there was something in that we could animate a static object with sound and light to make it kind of engaging and kind of ultimately sort of connect with somebody. But we knew that we, for whatever Origin was going to become, and it wasn't called Origin at the time. We came up with the idea a bit later. We knew we wanted something organic in our pursuit of creating analog experiences, but using technology. We knew we wanted something organic as the core of this sculpture. And I think also what Beyond the Road sort of taught us was that, I mean, ultimately we're visual people as well as sound people, and we kind of knew that in observing that person circling that tree, or other people circling an object, we kind of realised that having some sort of visual anchor in the space felt very important, because I think it meant that everyone in the space they're not only hearing the same thing, but they're looking at the same thing. And I think there's something in that collective experience which is sort of galvanizing for a group of people experiencing something, experiencing an experience, but also does allow for your own interpretation. It allows you to have an individual journey whilst part of a collective. So we knew we needed some sort of visual anchor, something that anchored the space that you're in. And we knew we wanted to have people lying down, because it's quite a nice ask, really. You know, do you want to come and lie down and listen to some music and be bathed in light? Is an easy sell. And we knew we wanted something organic at the core of this sculpture, and we knew in the spirit of kind of scaling down the ambition of the space and design, but not scaling down the ambition of what we want to do. We knew we couldn't go bigger. We couldn't put a full-size tree in the space, and we couldn't make a smaller tree because that would just be silly. So where do we go from there? And where we got to was, the origin of the tree, a seed, so which led us down a rabbit hole of what plants, what trees are out there that have seeds when they are germinating, that are of scale. Because we knew we couldn't just have a tiny little seed and scale that up, because it wouldn't. I think that would just shift the kind of the weight of it. I think a bit more. It would become a sort of an artist interpretation of a germinating seed that's small. But so before we knew it, we'd landed on a coconut as the germinating seed, and they are of scale, and the process by which a coconut germinates and ultimately grows into a tree is fascinating. The beginnings of the germination process happens inside the coconut, and they actually refer to some circles actually refer to that kind of that initial embryonic stage. They refer to it as an embryo, like inside the coconut. And then through one of the three holes that you see on a coconut, sprouts start coming through, and then that becomes the tree. And all of this really fell sort of aligned really quite nicely with how we were approaching the score, the soundtrack and the score for the piece, which was informed by this idea of origin, informed by this idea of the cycle of life, birth and death, and that we can't ignore either. And the world continues through this cyclical kind of birth and death kind of repetition. And two two of the collaborators that we worked with on that project were both expecting children, whilst we were kind of conceiving it and making the music, and both were experiencing their own journey of becoming parents through IVF. So there was a whole acknowledgement of what that process means as well. That there are so many moments of excitement and expectation, but then and joy that are countered by moments of sadness because the process hasn't worked. And yeah, we really tried to echo that in the soundtrack, in the score for it, which led us to this. It's quite a cinematic score, which has these big moments of crescendo that ultimately crash to nothing. But then ultimately the score does resolve and does take you to a place where you have that crescendo, but it then delivers after. So yeah, we took in a lot of influence from, and this origin experience is also it's cyclical. There's no real beginning or end. So I think we're just sort of being letting our instincts and letting our experience of life and making life and death kind of lead us to where the score kind of ultimately ended or landed, and the lighting aspect of it as well also kind of fed into that kind of sort of the ebb and flow of just sort of our human experience of life, for as short as it is, on this planet. So it's and the response has been very, very positive. People have found this experience in particular to be an invitation to it's an invitation from us to be with yourself, which I think anyone that has either tried meditation or even just sitting in a quiet room on your own can be quite a challenging thing to do. But so many people have come out of this particular deep listening experience overwhelmed with the sense of calm that they feel. They've allowed themselves to be with themselves and also to unwittingly process a lot of things that were kind of occupying their subconscious, or that tension that's in your shoulders, or that little thing that's niggling at the back of your brain. It's helped people sort of process trauma, loss, grief, which I think as artists that's all we can ever hope for, that the piece that you make hopefully allows someone to feel something, and I think and hearing and reading, because we have an old school comments book that people can write in. Seeing how people have responded to it is it's just wonderful. It's just wonderful, and also how honest and vulnerable people have been in writing what they write as well has been reassuring. Restores our faith in humanity, because a lot of the work that we're making is in many ways a bit of a reaction to the world at the moment. The world's pretty crazy, and our thought is that if we can provide a little bit of an antidote, just something which cuts the noise out and just allows you to be with yourself and be with a piece of artwork that is totally open to interpretation, is might just help you get through your day a little bit before you go back to the kind of the overstimulated, sort of dopamine addicted kind of world of mobile phones and 24-hour news and just chaos going on everywhere. So that's sort of, and we just installed a third of our deep listening experiences called Sanctum into the chapel in the same stately home up in Dunham Massey, it's called, up in Cheshire. And that's even more minimal. Origin, you walk into a space, you lie down on a mat on the floor, and you're dwarfed by a 7 foot tall, 4 foot wide black monolith that sits in the corner of the room. And then hidden at the core of that, which is revealed incrementally by lighting inside the monolith itself, behind a two-way mirror, is this focal point, this germinating seed. And for the version we have up in Dunham Massey, we actually responded to the gardens that they have up in that stately home, and they have giant Himalayan lilies that grow in the grounds, and the bulb for a giant Himalayan lily is about the size of a small head.
Oh, wow.
So it's of scale, and it's of that size because the giant Himalayan lily, the sprout that comes out the ground is about 8 or 9 feet tall. So it needs to have that strong foundation to keep it up. And as we dive more and more into the story of the giant Himalayan lily, it's wild. It's like it takes 7 years for that bulb to grow to a point that it's big enough and strong enough for the shoot to grow to full height. And you get it flowers, I think, for like a week or so, and then you're left with these seed pods. And these seed pods contain thousands of seeds. So when this giant Himalayan lily comes to the end of its life, in its last dying breath, it breathes thousands of seeds that rain down on the ground. And then it just takes one of those seeds to take. And then 7 years later, another giant Himalayan lily grows. And there was something that really spoke to us about the kind of, I think, just the time it takes to grow, and also the fragility of life itself as well. It takes the perfect conditions for one of these little seeds to go into the ground and then germinate into something that becomes ultimately huge and beautiful. But on the contrary, Sanctum is very much based around a soundtrack, a score, which sort of taps into ideas of entrainment. Just this sort of like this rhythmic, almost sort of ritualistic kind of pulse rhythm that permeates through the whole score, and doesn't necessarily have any real peaks or troughs. It's very much, it's quite minimal. But the visual anchor in that, instead of being a 7 foot tall black monolith, is a body of water that sits at the centre of the room with a sort of an LED strip of light that sits on the inside of the vessel that the water's in. And we're working with cymatic patterns. So sort of underneath the vessel of water, we've got a transducer which allows us to create cymatic patterns on the water. But for those experiencing it, there's seemingly no mechanism that these shimmers and these patterns are forming on the water. But if you watch them long enough, you realise that the patterns on the water are synchronised with the music in the room. So there's a real connection that you can make between something you're seeing and something that you're hearing, and ultimately something hopefully that you're feeling as well, because you join the dots between the physical manifestation of frequency and then also the frequency that we're experiencing, not only in our ears, but just in our bodies and in our brains in general. And that's there as a pop-up for the next 7 days. And it's gone into the chapel that's in the house. And we called it Sanctum because it's actually part of a bigger project called Temple. But we called it Sanctum because, we were kind of sort of exploring the idea of, in today's society, if you don't subscribe to a particular belief system, where is a space that you can go where you can just be with yourself and be with your thoughts. And, if meditation isn't your thing, if yoga is not your thing, or that this could be, this might be a thing that you could stumble across and ultimately sort of be comfortable in yourself within this space with this score that is deliberately trying to sort of hypnotize you in a way, and this visual anchor, which again is doing the same thing. It's sort of it only has 2 modes, sort of like one frequency, and then it's consumed by another frequency. But the simplicity of that, I think, allows for the mind to explore other places. So that's there for the next week. The dream version for Sanctum is that body of water, which is currently about 60 centimeters across, is actually about 3 meters across, and we still have those somatic patterns appearing on the surface of the water. But this is it's more important for us to share the work with people and get responses and reactions to it as a stepping stone to that full realized version of it. But saying that, the version we've got up at Dalhousie with this scaled down pool of water, it still works. It still does what it's supposed to do. But that's also that project is also us exploring what the multi-person version of it is, and also it doesn't have a specific start or end time. We're still exploring this idea of secular sort of looping kind of motif, which you can be in there for 5 minutes if you want, or you can stay in there for 2 hours. It's totally up to you. That's sort of where, as artists, we're getting to at the moment. We're just exploring that crossover between sort of art installation, sound installation, and sort of where that fits in with wellness and mental health, and how it could be just an addition to all of the things that are out there that could help us survive of everyday life.
Thanks to Stephen for the conversation. If you'd like to dive deeper, head to our Substack, Glyph-podcast, for show notes, links, and extras. You can also follow us on Instagram and TikTok at Glyph-podcasts. If you'd like to see a video of this conversation, head over to our YouTube channel. My name is Tupac Martyr. See you next time.